Hello, welcome to another week of Office Hours. This is the star of the show, Fraser. He says hello, and there is his sidekick, Milo. Hello, Milo. and then there's me. And I will come into view shortly. Anyway, speaking of Fraser and Milo, we want to start with a comment that came from the discussion forum from Luis Marcone, who suggested, after watching Office Hours, that perhaps cats display a Buddha nature that is even superior to the Buddha nature of dogs. Now, Luigi, I understand that you're kidding, and I thought it was funny. I just want you to know that Fraser and Milo were not amused. They did not find the humor in that. And in discussing that with them, a possibility came up that maybe it's not so much a question of which species has the superior Buddha nature, but which species has the more deeply hidden Buddha nature. I have long acknowledged that Fraser's Buddha nature is very deeply hidden, and Milo's, for that matter, isn't exactly always on shimmering display. But we think it's in there somewhere, even in the case of Fraser. Speaking of Fraser and Milo, you're probably wondering, what kind of week did they have? And more specifically, what kind of week did their modules have? I would say a good one. I mean, first of all, as usual, the status modules were on pretty effective display. Milo continued to try to unseat Fraser as alpha and continued to fail. Interestingly, this week, we also saw the appearance of their affiliative modules, which kind of, come and go. But there was an opportunity for them to really be front and center when the younger of my two daughters dropped by briefly from college to pick some stuff up, and the dogs had not seen her in a few weeks, and so their affiliative modules decided to affiliate with her. Okay, so that is affiliative modules doing their job. And I actually want to get back to making a serious point about my dog's modules and relating them to the modular view of the human mind. And I want to make an actual serious point. But first, I would like to kind of celebrate the fact that after quite a bit of kind of talking about this modular view of the human mind, in this week's lecture, we actually saw some potential application of the model to meditation. And I'm happy to report that in the discussion forum and on Facebook, some people picked up on this. So Lee Douglas, for example, in the discussion forum, summarized the segment of this lecture where we had Joseph Goldstein kind of describing the meditative experience and me trying to relate that to the modular view. Lee says, basically, you think your thoughts come from you, in quotes, so you listen to them. But by rejecting this and seeing them as semi-independent actors in your brain, you can listen to them more objectively and feel okay about allowing or dismissing their value, just as you might allow or dismiss the spoken thoughts coming from your neighbor. Remember, Joseph did that little kind of comparison, that little kind of thought experiment or exercise of imagine that all your thoughts are really coming from your neighbors. Anyway, and the key thing here, I think, is when Lee says you see your thoughts as semi-independent actors in your brain, you might say, wait a second, how can what's behind the thoughts? I mean, and that's one thing the modular model I think offers. The idea is there are these, as Lee puts it, semi-independent kind of modules generating thoughts, and that would help explain the claim by serious meditators such as Joseph that upon close inspection, the thoughts appear not to, in fact, be coming kind of from you, but more like towards you. Lee goes on to, let's see, Lee had a kind of a metaphor. From what I understand about modules, there isn't a controlling who that decides which module gets to put its thought in the conscious part of your mind. It's more like whichever module's cup fills up first wins the prize. Yeah, that's not a bad metaphor. I guess the more you use a module, the less that module's cup needs filling to spill into consciousness. Right. So you can actively change the parameters of module activation and therefore potentially change the outcome. In other words, by choosing which kind of modules carry the day by day, you choose which modules get stronger, which get weaker, which kinds of thoughts you're empowering on a regular basis. Of course, this brings up the question, who is this you who's doing the choosing? Didn't we say that there was no self? Well, this is a paradox that I think, incapable of resolving. And it's embedded in a whole lot of Buddhist discourse. But first I would like to dwell on the irony, right? That the irony is that by recognizing that you're not the one normally in control, you actually gain more control, right? By recognizing, hey, these thoughts are not coming from me, so actually I can pick and choose among them, you wind up getting empowered. Again, who are you? Who is this you that's being empowered? I don't know. I would emphasize that, again, for me, I think for much of the meditative path, this not self-teaching doesn't need to be confronted head-on. And I haven't personally, I think, gotten to the point where I need to really confront it head-on. I'm thinking of it in a more instrumental way, where the idea is just that, hey, there's no one thing that you have to think of as part of yourself. And I should add, Buddhists affirm the value of talking about you and me and him and her. The idea is that it is a conventional or relative truth that the self exists, but in some ultimate sense, it does not exist. If you're wondering, what would it be like to perceive it as not existing even in an ultimate sense? Maybe Jonathan Miller knows. Jonathan Miller said in the discussion forum, people, Joseph Goldstein and others had used this movie metaphor. You realize that your thoughts are just like a movie, and you break them down, and frame by frame, pixel by pixel, you realize it's not real. Jonathan says, I heard it put much better many years ago when the speaker compared the screen itself to the mind and the images to thoughts cast upon it. Okay, so he's saying don't do what Joseph was suggesting, that put yourself in the viewer in the shoes of the viewer of the movie. Put yourself in the shoes of the screen. Okay, this is all above my pay grade. These kinds of distinctions. My main point would be, and I don't doubt that I could get far enough along in the path that I would go, yeah, screen is the way to think of it. But my main emphasis now would be the question is, wait a second, who is directing the movie? Who is directing this part of the movie? And I think by saying, wait a second, that's just a module who is directing that part, I can rewrite the plot. That, for me, is the current take-home. Jamie West asks in the discussion forum, says, I'm not sure the modular theory of the mind necessarily means that there is no self. Isn't our self basically the combination of the modules inside us? Yes, at different times, different modules might be in charge, but surely those are just different aspects of ourselves. You can certainly think of it that way if you want. Again, the whole Buddhist argument about the self applies to a particular definition of self that was being used by early Buddhists, and scholars argue about exactly the finer contours, the finest contours of that, but of what the conception of the self was. But we've talked about a couple properties it has. In any event, yeah, suit yourself. But I think some people find value in doing, it'd be perfectly reasonable to say, I want to define the self as the whole thing, all of my modules, the whole show. But there are people, I think you can make the case that there is value in thinking of it in a different way, and in thinking, hey, not all of that stuff is necessarily me. Now back to my dogs and modules. Here's the kind of serious point. I touched on this a little bit in the context of chimpanzees, but in a previous office hours, but I want to revisit this a little. Here's the thing about dogs. Dogs, when you think about it, are a pretty compelling case for a modular view of the mind, because it's like, it does usually seem they're just like on one channel and then they change the channel, right? It's like there is the status thing. There is the affiliate with my daughter thing, and then you take them for a walk and the thing is like decide where to urinate. That's the focus. It's like there's a module for that. They may get distracted. They see another dog and then you see them, you got to figure it out. Is it an enemy? Is it a friend? Is it a dog they could mate with? These are the three basic questions that seem to be on their mind, and then they react appropriately. But then if the dog leaves, back on track. Where should I urinate? It seems very simple. It's like just switching the channels for a dog, okay? And what I want to say is that although, of course, we are not descended from dogs, we are descended from a creature roughly as cognitively complex as dogs, right? Somewhere in our evolutionary past, maybe in the early primate phase, who knows, 20, 30 million years ago, I have no idea. There's a creature about as complex as a dog. That's our direct ancestor. Then you have a series of amendments to our brain getting chosen by natural selection. And then here we are. And if you accept that at this earlier level of complexity, there's just these kind of finite number of functionally kind of specialized modes, then you got to ask yourself, well, why would that basic architecture change? I mean, in the course of subsequent evolution in between these creatures and us, right? I mean, obviously, things get a lot more complex and subtle, and there's more and more things you could call modules and networks, whatever, but more and more like little kind of specialized things that kick in here and there, and now they can kick in various combinations. It gets very complex, it gets very subtle, but still, the way natural selection works, since that species, I'm positing, is the same way it worked to get to that species, which is brains evolve to solve specific problems, and there's no reason for that to change. Granted, there are also some general purpose things that evolve, like complex language. But something's got to determine what are the contents of the language, right? And there, the argument would be that depends on which kind of mode you're in, which mode has been triggered, which problem is being confronted. And many of the problems that would have been confronted since the existence of this dog-level complexity creature would still be in the domains I mentioned with the dogs, right? It's like you see another member of your species, friend, enemy, a possible mate, what's the relative status? That's like, that would continue, because we have good reason to believe those things were correlated with getting genes into the next generation. How you handle those questions, how you handled friends, the extent to which you undermined your rivals, neutralized your enemies, maximized the value of your friendships, and so on. There's every reason to believe that a lot of subsequent machinery that evolved after this dog-level creature would have served those ends. Yes, it all gets so complex that you start wondering, well, is module a misleading metaphor? And I'm open to the possibility that a word like network, or some networks, systems, whatever. But the key thing from the point of this course is that you're in some sense shifting from self to self to self. In other words, different you're becoming a slightly different person as you confront the different situations, and you're not really usually consciously choosing to make the shift. Okay, and it isn't just different situations; it's a lot of other things that can change exactly the modality. But that is the fact that I think is a thing that's easy to overlook. The fact that there are these, again, kind of in some sense, semi-autonomous agents that are generating thoughts, maybe in some sense trying to inject them into your consciousness. Although, to dispel one misconception that arose in the discussion forum, that doesn't mean we're saying they're conscious. It's not impossible that they're conscious. It's just that I'm not really rendering a view on that. Okay, sorry if I went on a bit long about that, but you know how I get when I think about dogs and modules. Okay, Simona Holstein says, on Facebook, I found another modular mind approach by the psychologist Paul Gilbert in his book, The Compassionate Mind. Paul Gilbert describes these. There are 3 modules, one for vitality and action, one for anger and anxiety, one for content and connection. He has a Buddhist approach as well. As a psychologist, he's using meditation to help his patients. This underscores a point, which is that not all modular views of the mind are Darwinian. This is one that I would call not especially Darwinian because he seems, I haven't read the book, but he seems not to be thinking in terms of kind of specific functional machinery that's designed to respond to adaptive problems that the organisms face in the course of history. By the same token, not all Darwinian views of the mind are modular. I do think pretty much any Darwinian view of the mind does acknowledge a certain amount of functional specificity in the brain, but you can imagine a Darwinian model that is very CEO-oriented and isn't as decentralized as the modular view I've been describing. Jennifer Hawkins says, you mentioned that you don't necessarily subscribe to the specific modular mind view that I mentioned in the lecture. Well, which one do you subscribe to? Well, again, I don't think there is yet a super well developed version of this. It's super complex, so it's not like there's one I subscribe to. Jennifer would love some professor-endorsed versions of a modular view. Well, I would say that there are 2 authors or co-authors whose work I respect very much. One of this 2-person team, one member has appeared in our lectures. That's Leda Cosmides. Her husband John Tooby and she have written a lot of stuff. Lately, Leda has not been using the word module because, well, it's a whole issue about. There's a version of it that's been kind of popularized by other people that does not have all the features she wants to see in it. She now thinks there's some confusion, and I should say popularized by some kind of non-Darwinian thinkers. So I don't know if she's using the term system or what, but anyway, much of their writing uses the term module, especially their early writing. I would not say, they're not professional writers or popularizers, so it's not for the layperson the most accessible stuff. I would call it, pretty reliably well thought out, and a certain amount of it is on the web. So Cosmides, Cosmides, Tooby, Tooby. Throw in those 2 words with the word module or modular, and you'll probably get led to some stuff. Let's see, what else do we have here? Homeric Geek asks on Twitter, very much the same question, could you offer a few more suggestions for reading on the evolutionary psychology side, please? I would say Tooby and Cosmides are very good, and I'm just not aware of a lot of recent kind of actual popularization. But there are a number of, Paul Bloom is an evolutionary psychologist and writes accessibly, and I wouldn't say he's kind of been confronting ev-psych head-on lately, but it informs his view of whatever he's writing about. Steven Pinker's books are from the evolutionary psychology point of view. Martin Daly and Margot Wilson's work. Margot is unfortunately deceased, but there's a lot of their work lying around. Again, they are scholars, not kind of popularizers, but they're very good. Okay, what else? Manjeet Jindal, whose name I may be mispronouncing, asks via Twitter, natural selection designed us for an environment. Environment changed. Will it not do the same thing again, change us, our minds? Meaning, I think, can natural selection kind of catch up with our new environment and shape our minds to be suitable for the environment we're living in? Because we've talked, after all, about ways in which our mind does not seem to be well suited to a modern environment. It seems to kind of misfire in some respects, at least in a modern environment. And I would say, unfortunately, natural selection seems to take a while to work. And given how fast things are changing now, the chances of it kind of catching up are pretty slim. So the main adaptive mechanism needs to be what's called cultural evolution. And technically, cultural evolution is defined as basically all non-genetic evolution. I mean, there's two ways humans can transmit information through the generations. One is in their genes, and the other is every other way, the accumulation of scientific knowledge, technical knowledge, the evolution of religions, spiritual traditions, philosophy. All non-genetic transfer of information comes under the rubric of cultural evolution. And that's what, this course is about, a particular kind of culturally evolved approach to solving problems that the human mind faces, partly by virtue of being in an environment it wasn't designed for, but not only for that reason, okay? Because remember, it isn't just that natural selection didn't design our minds for this environment. Natural selection also doesn't care, in quotes, whether we're happy enduringly to begin with. So it cares about our interests only in the narrow sense of getting our genes into the next generation, and when you think about it, there's no reason we should share that emphasis. It's up to us whether we want to focus on getting genes into the next generation or just being happy, or being happy and helping people who don't share our genes. It's all up to us. And my point here is just, even if we were living in a hunter-gatherer environment, the environment we were kind of designed for by natural selection, more or less, I would say there would still be a place for meditation of the kind we've been talking about, because it in any event can help liberate you from evolution's agenda, should you decide you don't share it. Dana Saron, S-A-R-O-N, Solnick, asks via Facebook, how does the modular model of the mind explain altruism that is neither kin, care, quote, nor affiliation? Also, how does it relate to a drive towards spirituality or faith? So a lot of questions there. Milo seems interested in those. How you doing, Milo? He's doing okay. First of all, in the last part, first of all, I would say this is broadly, in a way, this is a question for evolutionary psychology, not just for the specific modular model of the mind we've been kind of talking about. And as for the second part, hi, Milo. How does it relate to a drive towards spirituality or faith? If the question is, why is it that humans everywhere seek religious... in all cultures, there seems to, the religious impulse or spiritual impulse seems to manifest itself. I tackled that in the appendix of my book, The Evolution of God, and that part of the book is available online for free. If you go to evolutionofgod.net, you will see there's excerpts from every chapter. You click on appendix, and it will say, here's an excerpt from the appendix. But just between you and me, it's not an excerpt from the appendix. It's the whole appendix. So it's my whole kind of chapter-length account of where the religious impulse comes from. On the question of altruism that is neither kin care nor affiliation, in other words, as an evolutionary psychologist would put it, explained neither by kin selection nor by reciprocal altruism. In other words, it's not a matter of just us forming friendships, kind of reciprocal altruistic loops. It's interesting question. I think certain things can be explained in principle by the fact that, remember, we evolved in a context, hunter-gatherer society, in which everyone we saw would have been someone we would be seeing again, pretty much. So if, for example, you see a homeless person on the street, Milo, are you trying to get on camera? I'm sorry, but there's more important things than that still. So if if you see somebody, a homeless person on the street, you may notice, you have trouble, especially if you make eye contact with them. Okay, Milo, enough. Nice seeing you, though. It's hard to turn them down. And, when you think about it, in a hunter-gatherer environment, any person, if they were really, really needy, it would have made sense in the somewhat cynical calculus of Darwinism to extend them a favor if they really needed it. That would leave them eternally indebted to you. That's one possible explanation. But the larger point is just that, look, as we reflect, we can choose to redeploy our basic impulses. We don't have to follow the strict agenda of natural selection. You can send money to people on the other side of the world who need your help, and it's great that you can. Milo, sorry. Milo led me to misplace my script, as it were. Okay, so Kathy Crochet asked, do modules mature or develop with age? Yeah, I would say. I mean, the whole mind does. So if the modular model is accurate, sure. An interesting thing about maturing and developing with age is makes it hard to tell, whether meditation is helping you, in the sense that, I've had people say to me, well, since you started meditating, I think you've become a nicer or gentler person or something. And, I say, well, yeah, but I've also been getting older, and, that kind of happens. People calm down a little bit. So it's hard to control your variables. But I don't personally have any doubt that meditation helps, because I notice the effects on a day-to-day basis. The difference between a day I meditate and a day I don't meditate, I think, is tangible. But anyway, yes, someone else had asked, I wish I took down the name, about plasticity. They said they had heard modular views of the mind criticized as not accommodating change in the mind, basically. Plasticity. That, I think, is a bad rap. And it's kind of a bad rap against evolutionary psychology generally. EvPsych can totally, in principle, account for a highly plastic mind, okay? And I want to, dispel one common misconception is that evolutionary psychology is the view that when you see two people behaving differently, it must be because they have different genes. No, that's not inherent at all. I mean, different evolutionary psychologists have different views on the extent to which genetic differences between individuals matter. But certainly, evolutionary psychology could in principle explain how mechanisms evolve that will translate certain kinds of environments into certain kinds of behavioral tendencies. And in fact, Martin Daly and Margot Wilson, whom I mentioned earlier, one of the great virtues of their work was they showed how, for example, seeming tendencies toward violence among inner city youth could be the product of a kind of evolved mechanisms that's designed to assess the environment you're in and generate behavioral tendencies that are appropriate to that environment. So if you're in an environment where life expectancy is lower than in other environments and a whole host of other things, as they pointed out, it might make sense for the brain to steer your behavior toward a less risk-averse strategy. And so anyway, yes, plasticity is what's being called neuroplasticity now, is fully compatible with a Darwinian view of the mind and a modular view of the mind. Speaking of modular views, I want to revisit the thing when I referred to the Paul Gilbert book, I think that was the name that somebody brought up. I want to emphasize, the book could be, have a different view from my own modular view of the mind and still be a very valuable and helpful book. You could take a non-Darwinian modular view and say, well, there are, and it might be productive in various senses, certainly including a kind of what you might call a therapeutic one. Joseph Everly started a thread in the discussion forum called, "If there is no self, then how are we supposed to complete the self-evaluation portion of the writing assignment?" Joseph was joking. And it was funny. It was good. I think Joseph should team up with Luigi, whom we started this office hours with, and maybe form like a Buddhist comedy team or something, tour the retreat centers. It's a great audience at the retreat centers, a captive audience. They got nothing to do. They're dying for a reason to laugh. But speaking of the evaluations, this is a reference to the midterm evaluation, the midterm assignment evaluations. Katya Prokina, or some other pronunciation of Prokina, who is in Moscow, tweets that have just finished evaluating, and says some essays with personal examples are really touching. I just think that's really cool. That here she is in Moscow, reading these things that are generated by people presumably all over the world, and getting in, having a very personal form of contact with them. And it's a reminder that as much as all of this technology complicates our lives and gives us reason to pursue meditation, there is tremendous potential in it. And I think maybe meditation can help us realize the potential more fully and be less kind of victimized by the downside of technology. That reminded me of something, but it has slipped my mind. Okay, so kind of finally, Kyle Findlay. Wait, is this Kyle Findlay or Carol Schatz? It's one of the two. It's one responding to the other. Anyway, it's picking up on a theme that I touched on. The question had been raised, well, does meditation possibly dampen your kind of what you might call moralistic or moral fervor or whatever, kind of the passion of your moral judgments, such that any impulse toward activism might be dampened? It's an interesting question. I'd love to hear people's thoughts on this. But in any event, this person, Kyle or Carol, as the case may be, alerts us to a YouTube video in which Ram Dass, famous contemplative, asked Thich Nhat Hanh, another famous contemplative, apparently said, many activists whose heart hurts because of the pain of injustice or pain to the environment often say to me that the attempt to be mindful of one's anger and hold it tenderly will dissipate the anger that they use for social action. Would you talk about that issue? I have to admit, I have not watched this YouTube video, but I encourage people to, and since you don't have the URL, maybe I should promise that in the email that I send out to alert you to this office hours, I will, as a PS, include the link to that. I'd love to hear more discussion of that. Okay, I've gone on too long. Fine, I can't believe it, but the final lecture is coming up this week. It's happened fast. I have to apologize. The final lecture is a little longer than the others. There was a lot of stuff that I wanted to try to fit in to kind of pull things all together. I don't know if I succeeded in pulling things together. I did succeed in generating a longer lecture than usual. But I hope you'll stick with it. Let me know what you think. As always, in the discussion forum, on the Facebook page, tweet to me at Darwin Dharma. Thank you, That scratching sound is Milo tearing up the carpet and suggesting that it's time for a walk. So that's what we'll go do. Thanks, and I will see you next time.